one of the old timers, Donald Comrie, lived here. He said an old Indian told him one time, he said, the white man does everything backwards. He said, he brings his cows back here into the hills in the summertime. He takes them out on the prairie in the wintertime. He said, the buffalo stayed out on the prairies in the summertime and came back here in the wintertime where the wind blew off the hills and the springs ran fresh water for them. He said, the buffalo knew how to do it.
But they got lots of country, so, you know, they didn't have to come back to the same area for a year or two sometimes, and most ranches don't have that luxury. We don't. We try to use it differently as much as we can every year, but you have to use it. You know, we get over it all every year.
We're not really trying to mimic what the buffalo do, but what we are trying to do is we're trying to find the genetics that are best suited for the way that we operate our ranch, that find the genetics and multiply them that are best suited for the environment that we run cattle in.
And that's one reason that we have some buffalo now, is that Grandpa was instrumental in getting the experimental station to try and crossbreed buffalo and cows so he could get something that would paw in the wintertime. Because the buffalo will paw some in our experiences, but mostly what the buffalo do is take their head and their beard and sweep the snow away, and then they've got ground to graze.
And if you got them to that point where they were domesticated, you'd probably have lost all the benefits that they have now that you were wanting to preserve. You'd make them into a cow, right? You'd make them into a beef cow. Like buffalo, if one goes, they all go, right? Like wherever the first one goes, they're all gonna go. They're kind of like sheep that way, right? The big sheep. They're not, and they're different, right? They're not like a cow.
And really interesting to have them around, and they are kind of a pain at some time, but they are an interesting animal, and they're totally different to handle. You don't chase them or get in the corral on with your horse because they'll kill your horse, but you can go in there on foot and you can kind of work them. But if you see a tail go straight in the air, you leave that buffalo alone, because that's the sign that he's had enough, or she's had enough. Leave her alone. I've been chased on my horse with a buffalo one time, and it's not a real exciting experience.
I would think it would be an exciting experience.
You seemed excited enough at the time.
Yeah. It would be great if we could just run buffalo and not cattle, but you can't manage them, right? Like the management aspect of them is they're still just slightly more domestic than a really wild animal. If you took buffalo to the forestry, you'd never see them. Like you can't, right? Like I mean, they're the province's animals, and there's no season on them, so they're anybody's fair game. If a buffalo gets loose on forestry land, they're there's no hunting season on them, so they're free game for anybody to harvest one to eat themselves or whatever they want. So you can't run buffalo on crown land really, but yeah, but it's the management aspect of it is unfeasible. But buffalo, you can keep them from, like, they think they're in a fence if they can't see through it. So you can hang a tarp on a rope and they will not go through it. But big heavy steel panel they can see through, they'll try to run through it because they can see through it. So we'll hang some tarps and stuff on strategic points, corners, gates, whatever, because that's just a lot easier on them. Yeah, they don't like being handled really. They prefer you didn't handle.
Partly because of their pec system, they end up crowded and they don't.
Right.
And then they start hooking each other, and then it's just a madhouse. So they don't like being.
It's stressful to them.
Yeah,
so nobody likes being put in a stretch.
And our buffalo are getting pretty gentle comparatively. Really,
But
they're,
but
but they still don't
it's
like
just-
being jammed together.
Yeah, that's just the way they are. They
Yeah.
don't.
Buffalo are actually a little bit hard on the country too. They build big wallows and they like big digging holes and
Yeah.
dusting themselves and you know it's
Yeah, they do.
they're a little
And where they dig those holes, they roll in it all the time, and then the salt off of their skin gets in there and sterilizes the soil, and it won't grow anything for a while. Like they do have their downside too. Upside to them is that, like, as far as like predation goes, they like the tops of hills. They don't like the valley bottoms. They feel safe on top. If they're gonna bed somewhere, they all go lay on like a herd of elk. They all go lay on the top of the hill where they can see everything coming. So I mean, we use them as a grazing tool in places where our cows don't want to walk to the far end to the top of the hill to graze. Where the buffalo are more than happy to do that. They'll do that 3 times a day.
Well, the buffalo like being high on higher ground, so they will utilize the tops of your hills and stuff a lot better than your cows. Your cows are more apt to lay in the bottoms of your coulees and lower ground. They're kind of lazy, so unless you make them go to the top, they generally won't.
and when they go to the top of the hill and they bed up there, then they fertilize up there as well. That's one of the only ways you can build soil is by the cattle and the buffalo and whatever leaving their litter behind, build soil. So then the tops of the hills are always spots that need a little extra fertilizer, a little extra help.
I guess to me and my family, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to tear these mountains down when they're the headwaters of Alberta and Saskatchewan's water. It's not economically feasible in my they're not making enough off of the coal that they're going to pull out of these mountains and wreck the country for it to be worth it. I mean, ranching and agriculture is a way better renewable resource and makes way more money than they're ever going to make off of the coal they're going to pull out of these mountains.